creative, so marvelously, wondrously creative. That was just a tiny taste of the wonders that occupy our world and show off His beauty, His majesty, His glory, His creativity. One thing that we may find hard to believe is that when you look in the mirror and when you look around you this morning, you see the crown of God's creation. And all God's people said, "Are you kidding me?" One of the things I love about that video is that it's a reminder, with all that beauty, how can you say there is no God? To tell you the truth, those aren't the pictures that people are looking at who say there is no God. The pictures they look at are pictures like these. Often those who have struggled with the reality of evil in our world have concluded that the evil and the ugliness in our world are so much worse than the beauty and the good that there cannot possibly be a loving God behind it all. We think of people like that when we think of atheists. But there is another kind of atheist that was described for us in Psalm 14. The fool says in his heart, "There is no God." I'm using the term practical atheists. It's not that these people believe God doesn't exist. They believe God doesn't matter. In terms of their practical daily living, their choices, their responses, they don't really care what God has said. They're going to do and think and act what they want to. They may believe in God, but in practical terms, they act like God doesn't exist. Practical atheists. One commentator said, "The fool of Psalm 14:1 aggressively and intentionally flouts his independence from God and from His commandments." So are you getting a picture of what I mean by a practical atheist? Somebody who keeps God at arm's length. It's not that God doesn't exist, it's that for them, God doesn't matter. What is disturbing is the number of practical atheists who show up in church on a regular basis. You can be a church attender, even a member, and still be a practical atheist. In the heart, where the thoughts and emotions and the will reside, this person has no time for God. Within the congregation, he may mimic the sounds of faith, but his true self shows disregard for God, for His commandments and His people. He is characterized by an absence of concern or love for others, but is occupied with himself or herself. Often the practical atheist who comes to church on a regular basis is the kind of person that unbelievers will look at and say, "If that's a Christian, I'm not interested." I may have shared with you once before, I've learned at one point that one reason so many restaurant workers dislike the Sunday afternoon shift is because the many church people who go there at that time, not all, but too many, can be rude and demanding and notoriously cheap tippers. Nobody's responding. Am I hitting close to home? One Sunday, a man who looked as if he had just come from church was helping himself at a buffet when a harried worker trying to refill the salad bar tripped and spilled a container of Thousand Island dressing on the man's suit. He looked at her and he screamed at her, "Look at what you've done! This is a $300 suit. Look at what you've done. You've ruined this suit." Proceeded to give her a tongue lashing like she had never had before. The manager out back heard the commotion, came out, found out what was going on, apologized profusely for her carelessness, offered to pay the dry cleaning bill. "Dry clean nothing. You're going to buy me a new suit." If that's a Christian, I don't think I'm interested. People in the restaurant were thinking. Now, compare that kind of Christianity to what Paul says as he prays for his friends in Ephesus. "I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts by faith." God's purpose for you, for all of us as believers, is that Jesus may be more and more at home in your heart. The fool says in his heart there is no God. The practical atheist says God doesn't matter. The follower of Jesus says, "Lord, make yourself at home here." Paul's prayer is that Christ may dwell in our hearts by faith. Look at the ceiling for just a second, if you can tolerate looking up that much. Tiles and lights and fans and speakers, a couple of microphones. Above them, those strong trusses that hold the roof up, doing their work year in and year out through tons of snow and the stress of time. What we didn't know before this renovation project is that every one of the trusses above the ceiling, just above our heads, had a crack in it. Every single one. And the engineers who came to scope out the place as they were preparing for the renovation came to the committee working and said, "We have a much bigger problem," or should we say, "You have a much bigger problem than you realized." Thankfully, because of the lots that had been behind the church and the money we got from their sale, we were able to have all those trusses repaired so that now you don't have to worry, as one of the engineers said, "I can't believe that after this past winter's snow, that ceiling had not come down." It was that serious. And we all came in here Sunday after Sunday, praising God, sharing with each other, catching up with each other, not knowing that our very death was hanging above us. Obviously, Father has other things in mind for us. But before those workers could do that really terrific work outside, they had to get this work done first. Structural things take precedence over cosmetic things. Anybody here feeling nervous right now? For those who have come to faith in Jesus, Jesus, by His Spirit, has actually moved in. But the moment He moves in, He doesn't do things quite like other people who share space with us. When Janice and I lived in New Holland, my youngest brother Tom lived with us for a time. He had been virtually living out of his car for a while, and it was an absolute disaster. So when he came to live with us, I've learned after many, many years of being married to Janice that she is an excellent housekeeper. And I've learned there are some things it's important for the other half of this marriage to do to keep the house in presentable order. Tom hadn't learned that yet. So when he came to live with us, there was a very steep learning curve for Tom. I'm not sure he ever quite got it, did he, sweetie? He tried, but Tom is Tom. Tom's married now. His wife is very much like Janice that way, so he's had to learn. When Jesus moves in, he's not like my brother. Hey, whatever, you know. When Jesus moves in, he lets us know there are some things here that need to change if I'm going to continue living with you, and I plan to continue living with you. At first, it feels like he's just rearranging some furniture. Boy, Jesus, you're right. That chair looks much better there. And some pictures on the wall. Well, let's get rid of some of those. I mean, they're not only ancient and really out of style and really tacky, but some of them really ought not to be in this house. Let's get rid of those pictures, replace them. Ah, it looks pretty nice, Jesus. And he said, no, wait a second. Let's talk about your foundation. I was down there, and I know where the cracks are, and I know where the water's coming in. I know where those things are. We need to work on that. I know where the rafters are split and sagging. I know where the termites in the walls are in your house. And I know so many other things about you, some things you're not even aware of yet. And together, we're going to change these things so that I can be really at home with you. And as he's doing those changes and making those changes from the inside, that change shows up on the outside so that when people see us, they begin to see a difference. The difference that he makes from the inside will show up from the outside. It's a bit like, I know for years my sister tried desperately to get my dad to stop smoking. And one Sunday morning, he had agreed to go to church with us. And he came into the car. We were all dressed and clean and shiny and ready to go to church. And my dad had come out a little bit late, had a cigarette in his mouth, got in the car. My sister said, do you have to smoke that cigarette? Dad walked back into the house, and we went to church by ourselves. Eventually, you could convince someone to stop smoking and stop swearing and stop doing all those terrible things they do, and they can change all those things. But if their heart has not been changed by Jesus, all those other changes don't mean anything. In Revelation 3:20, Jesus says, here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, how's the rest of it go? I will come in to him and sup with him, eat with him, and he with me. Many of us have heard even this verse used as an invitation for people to come to Jesus for the first time. But the verse was written to believers, followers of Jesus who kind of lost track of their relationship with him and made other things more important and became blind to their real situation. And so when Jesus is knocking, it's not so much on the outside of the door. Those who know Jesus have asked him to come in. He's knocking on the closet door that you've kept locked for a long time. What's in here? He's knocking on the cellar door. What's in here? It's not that he doesn't know. It's just that he wants us to see that he knows, and now it's time to make the change. He makes those changes so that when we bear witness to his reality in our life, that witness rings true. You may recall at old Anvil days, there was a booth sponsored by the Pennsylvania Atheist Society. I stopped at one of the booths and talked to a woman there. She was very intelligent, very polite, very warm and friendly. I think she'd have made a great neighbor. I really do. There had been no trauma in her life, no confrontation with the reality of evil that left her scarred and disbelieving. She had grown up in church, went to college, and there just discovered that God simply wasn't big enough to account for reality. In a sense, she felt she had outgrown God. I hope she's there next year because I'd like to find out what the God she doesn't believe in is really like. It could be that I don't believe in that God either. I pray for her, and I hope that next year Jesus will become so much more at home in my life that I won't be afraid of her. People have said, "Watch yourself, Pastor, she's an atheist." You know, those pastors, they can't take it when the real rough and tumble comes. And I pray that I won't be angry with her. How dare she not believe in God? I won't be afraid and I won't be angry, but I pray that she will see and experience the real Jesus in me and discover that He is bigger than the God she doesn't believe in. How do you make Jesus more at home in your heart? In the month of August, we're going to do a series through part of the book of Ephesians that I'm titling The Perfect Church. I hope you plan to be here because you're it. Say what? Come and find out. The fool says in his heart, there is no God, meaning God doesn't matter. The practical atheist says in his heart, I don't care what God thinks, He doesn't matter to me. But the follower of Jesus has answered the knock and allowed Jesus to come in and said, Lord, make yourself at home, whatever it takes. Are you letting Him make Himself at home in you? Pray with me.